Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Breaking Point podcast. Today we are here with Morgane. Is it Borzee? I should have asked that as well.
It's Borzee, yes.
Borzee, of course, I should know that. Morgane Borzee. And Morgane is the founder of an app, not just an app, but partially an app called Equanima. Pronouncing that right?
Yes.
Probably sounds better with your accent, but we'll go with Equanima or Equanima. And Morgane, why don't you explain to people what the app is primarily for before we get into a bit about you?
Sure. So the app teaches people about emotional intelligence, main skills on self-awareness, emotion regulation, and communication skills for relationships.
Okay. And why did you decide to start an app on those, or because it's not just an app, it's all sorts of mediums. Why did you decide to come up with an app revolving around those topics?
I really felt in love with the topic, been really interested in psychology for a long time, and I'm a designer by profession. So I like to have everything visual. I'm a very visual person. And I had issues dealing with anxiety for pretty much all my life. And I've been on and off therapy. And in the pandemic, I found a really, really good therapist. I was very lucky to find her. And I remember that she was showing me through the webcam, like charts and things about this theory and psychology. And I found it so insightful. But of course, my designer brain was looking at this like white, black and white chart that was like horrible design with very academic language. I was thinking like, how can we make this like characters, storytelling? Because it was very, very insightful and really changed how I view my own relationship with my thoughts, I would say.
As in, creating the app helped you with your own difficulties?
Yes, it helps you see another perspective of the things that are going on in your life emotionally and also the thoughts that you have. So it's all based on different concepts from CBT, from the circumplex model of emotions. These are like typical frameworks for psychology, and also a structural dissociation, which is more of a trauma and chronic stress model, which is the one that my psychology was showing me through the camera. And I was like, oh my God, this is incredible. I wish I knew this sooner. When I started to talk with my friends and family, they were like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. Oh, and I was like, right, why don't I teach this in school? So
That's definitely a very good point. Why don't they teach us in school? And going back to the bit you said just at the beginning of what you were saying there, huge, presumably in your opinion and from a wider perspective, a huge part of emotional regulation is being able to view your own circumstances from outside someone else, from a different person's perspective. Would you say that that is quite important to understanding your own feelings, to be able to separate yourself from what you're feeling, create that divide?
yes, this is a really good start because in the brain we have two main areas. We have the amygdala, which processes emotions, and we have the prefrontal cortex, that it's the reasoning planning part. So once we face stress, normally, or every emotional situation, the information always goes first to the amygdala, meaning the impulsive, reactive brain, and then later goes to the prefrontal cortex, what we can actually measure and see if it's really a threat or not, or it's really like something to worry about. So when we start to take some distance to ask some questions, okay, what exactly am I feeling? Let's label that feeling. How does it feel on my body? It's already engaging your prefrontal cortex, which is the one that focuses on calm you down. It's engaging it in a way where the amygdala starts to lose some focus, and it helps to regulate the amygdala. So just the act of thinking of labeling the emotion, thinking how the emotion feels on my body, thinking of possible needs behind the emotions, it's already helping see it from another perspective.
I really like that. I like that idea of, in the actual moment, you label and you try and, ironically, it's a time when you should try and over intellectualize. Do you know what that means? Over intellectualize? Yeah, like
Yes.
just overthink it. you should actually try and activate your overthinking part of the brain, because in that specific scenario, the part of the brain that's in charge is the chimp brain, you could say, or it's the emotional, as you said, the amygdala. So engaging the cortex, the prefrontal cortex, is very important in clawing back control through a intellectual and more cognitive point of view. So that is really good.
Yeah, and you mentioned an interesting word, control, because I think the attitude around how we see this is it could change differently the result. Because if we go with an attitude, for example, I have an anxious feeling, and I go with the attitude like, let's control this feeling, let's think of things that don't make us anxious, then the attitude is not going to be helpful. The correct attitude should be curiosity without judgment. Huh, I notice this anxious feeling in my body. What may be the worry behind the feeling? Without any judgment, without any try to suppress it, control it, because at the end, the more we try to suppress, the more it's gonna come in our face in a way. So it's important to really have this curious, non-judgmental approach, as almost, well, I don't know if this happens to you, but when you have some situation, maybe there are many voices in your head like, oh, you should have not done this, or you should have approached this differently. And there is a lot of should, and there is a lot of maybe remorse, guilt, and
Yes.
not necessarily helpful. So if instead of that, we just remain curious about the inner dialogue in our head, who is saying what is being said, without any judgment. It's being said that I'm very like stupid because I did this. Okay, let's jot it down. You can have a notebook, like jot the different thoughts down. And then at Equanima, we have a framework that comes from the psychology also about the types of stress responses. Are you familiar with the fight and flight?
Yes. Yeah.
So basically, these are responses to stress, and people normally tend to go into a pattern. Some people are more the flight, some people are more the fight, the stress. But there are also other responses, such as the freeze or the submit, which is like, I'm going to do whatever other people said so I don't get in a conflict, like I don't mind my own needs, like let's do your way, like I don't want any problems. That's the submit, I'm going to submit to the threat. And then is the attach, which is, oh, please don't go, like I won't survive without you, like very like depending, clinging. So everybody has a different response. Normally that comes from what we learn in childhood. But these responses are like yourself trapped in 5-year-olds. So imagine that you're driving a car, you are in the wheel, you have the power, you're driving, and then you see on the street something that reminds you of something that happened when you were little. And then you have your little 5-year-old you on the copilot side. And then this little you says like, ooh, this rings a bell. Ooh, we've seen this before. We know what's going to happen. And then this little self drives the wheel and tries to go the same way that it remembered that it worked in a way when he was little. And then that's what happens in real life. But remind you that this reaction that sometimes we judge, like, oh, how could we lost our papers like this? It's actually a little you trying to help you, trying to protect you from something. If you freeze on a moment where you said, I should have said something, remind you that this freezing is probably a protector that helped you in the past. And this shifts the whole perspective to how we have a conversation in our heads. So like, I shouldn't be judging. I should be saying like, don't worry. I know that this sounds familiar. I know that this feels threatening, but me, the adult, we can take care of it. You don't need to worry about it. So it's a totally different thought process.
Yeah, you bring up the inner child, and the inner child is, that's, so I assume that's what you were you were talking about the inner child, and that's a really interesting sort of phenomenon. The way, the idea that our past selves live inside us, which doesn't make a lot of sense. And the past self is almost immune to time, because if your 5-year-old self is still in you now, it doesn't have any conception of time, because it's my 5-year-old self is now 20 years older than it was back then, but in theory it doesn't perceive that, and that's really interesting. Just going back to the stress response, because I think that is obviously a exceptionally relevant part of what you're doing. I think you did actually explain it right at the end. Apparently there's another stress response sort of paradigm, which is tend and befriend. I think that's might have been what you said when you said attach, and was it split or something? What was the second to last one?
It was submit.
Submits, yeah,
Yes.
submit, yeah. So I think that's tend and befriend, and that is never ever spoken about. I mean, you're the first person who I've ever spoken to on this podcast and in general who have moved outside of the fight, flight, and freeze. Everyone thinks that those are the only three, which I guess they make sense from a visceral sort of in the moment perspective. But the tend and befriend aspect is really also really relevant, and it's a more feminine response, which I guess makes sense. But that was, I think, the whole sort of fight or flight stress response is very interesting. And freeze, a lot of the time people forget that freeze is a very, very common stress response. And it might even be that one of the most common stress response, maybe even more common than fight or flight, because when we procrastinate, that's a freeze stress response, I think. And more people believe that procrastination is not due to laziness, it's more due to the fear. So your body just doesn't do it. It just sort of stops. Doesn't necessarily run away from it, but it obviously doesn't go towards it. It just sort of maybe submit is another good one in this response, in this scenario. But another thing I wanted to talk about is, do you know who Caesar Milan is?
Yes.
Yeah. So I've been watching I used to watch him, The Dog Whisperer, which was his show when I was a lot younger, but I've gone back to watching some of his new content that he puts up on YouTube. And it's amazing how you watch dog owners and dogs interact with one another and how they're kind of like extensions of each other. So the recurring themes, one of the recurring themes that crops up is if the owner is agitated on edge, the dog then goes into hyper mode, but hyper alert mode and defensive mode. But if the owner is calm and stable, solid, then the owner can control and sort of calms the dog down. And I was just, when we were talking about the two different parts of the brain, the human, the owner is like the prefrontal cortex and the dog is like the amygdala. And if you can just sort of tell the dog or show the dog, I'm in charge, you're okay, you're going to be okay. Whereas it's a bit of a weird, it doesn't quite work, the analogy, but I think there's something in there with that separation and how the dog is responsive to what's going on around you. So I guess maybe that's where confidence comes in, because confident seems as if it's more prefrontal cortex than amygdala, because it's not necessarily emotion, it's more of a state of mind. So yes, that was just a random one. I just wanted to, because just as you were talking, I thought that was quite relevant to what you were talking about, and given that I'd been watching him recently.
Yeah, this example that you say about the dog, it's actually something that you can replicate in what happens with a child and their parents.
Yes, yeah.
Because the child doesn't is not born with emotion regulation. The child learns from their parents and from their parents being calm and attuned to the baby. But what happens when the parents are not attuned or stress themselves, carry trauma, carry issues in their lives, is that this child doesn't learn about emotion regulation. And that is critical because this is a skill that when you learn at a certain age, it's the age where you are specifically developing how to regulate yourself, how to learn to breathe, and you copy that from the people that you have around you. And one of the misconceptions in society is that trauma is something that happens through a catastrophic event. It can happen through something catastrophic, an accident, a war, or something really, really bad, but one-time event. But what most people don't see is that trauma is also when I, as a kid, haven't had my needs met, my fundamental needs met about love, caring, attention, being heard, being seen. So these people also have some of the same issues with anxiety, with regulation, with anger. It depends because, as I mentioned, it depends on what context you were born to really understand what is your strategy. In my case, I was in a house where there was a lot of not physical but oral violence, you know? So for me, expressing anger was not safe because I learned really, really little that anger was dangerous and that so I needed to submit to that's no problem, you can do whatever. I wouldn't even say my needs, and it took me a very long time of therapy to be able to just express my needs without this feeling that somebody's go wrong, or somebody's going to get mad at me and I'm going to create some conflict. So you mentioned this confidence, and I don't agree that the confidence is only rational.
Okay, that's fair enough.
I think that there is a lot of body memories
Mm-hmm.
that are playing much into the amygdala, into what the amygdala has learned is safe or not. And some people have great instincts, great childhoods, and make them feel safe overall, but some people do not. And this is much more than thinking and having achievements in your life, saying like, "Oh, I did well. I have a good salary. I have this and that and that. I should feel confident, but I don't." So it's different, and that's why understanding what parts are also the fight, the freeze, the flat, the submit part are getting more activated can make us understand really where is the fear coming from. And as you say, normally it's not from the present, it's from the past.
Yeah, the level of impact that parenting has on children, particularly, it's kind of like there's a quote. I think it goes something along the lines of "Show me the 7-year-old, and I'll show you the adult." And the idea is, I think it's to do with brainwave states, and you move through different brainwaves from maybe you're an alpha between the ages of 0 and 7, and then you move into theta or delta or something like along those lines. Don't quote me. But that is a really interesting point, and there's loads of studies that have been done. For instance, certain babies that aren't loved and touched will actually die. Not as in like they'll be scarred mentally, they'll literally die, which is incredible. And they're from a, what's the word? And is it from anthropomorphic point of view with animal studies? There have been studies done on chimpanzees that very, very exceptionally cruel studies and amoral, where they take baby chimpanzees away from their parents and they basically keep them in pretty much solitary confinement, and then they try and reintroduce them back in, and none of them can. They're basically just ruined. Like they're just done.
Yes.
I don't think chimpanzees like commit suicide, but they commit social suicide. They can't be integrated back into the group. They
They
have no.
become they become aggressive.
Yes,
They fight
exactly. Yeah.
each other, and why? Because the instinct of the child, or in this case the animal, is that if I don't have the love of my parents, which are like the person that should love me and protect me the most, what could I expect about the world
Yes. Yeah.
that I live?
Yeah.
And there are two fundamental needs for humans. There is the need for attachment and connection, which is okay, attunement with the parents. The parents look at their child, smile when the child smiles, hug them, say them they love them. Many things that has to do not only with the things that we said, but how, like, our body language, how we give the attentions to them. This is the attachment. It's going to be the main driver, because what happens if the child is not attached to the parents? How many chances of survival it has? They don't have. So it's wired into our brains. If we don't attach with our parents, we are gonna die, and that's how it works. The second need is the need for authenticity, the need for allowing for ourselves to be as we are and accept us with our emotions, with our needs, with whatever expression we have of ourselves. And when there is a conflict between the attachment and the authenticity, then there is a big problem. Because what happens when I'm angry and then my parent says like, you are not acceptable angry, go and calm yourself. It's like, okay, anger, if I'm angry, I'm not accepted, I'm not loved, anger is out of the question. And there are so many things that happen in that way. That in a child, there is no decision. It's like, if I have authenticity and attachment and there is a conflict, I will go through attachment. I will stop feeling whatever I'm feeling, I'll stop talking about the needs that I have as long as I have the attachment with my parents. And by doing so in a long time, there is a point where we don't know ourselves anymore. We don't know what we feel. We don't know our needs. We have no idea because we have been told so much to adjust in a way to be lovable that even when we are adults and our parents are not there anymore, we keep behaving that way. And that is like leading to stress, to emotional pain, because we are not aligned with our values and our needs. And that's what happens commonly. And that's one of the things Equanima is trying to help people with, to understand what are the emotions, the needs, the values, so they can live a life that is aligned and is fulfilling.
I like that. That's very good. How do you think we're born with innate values, or do you think we learn to? Do we discover them as we grow up? What are your values? Second part of the question.
All right. So I believe that, yes, the humans first are sociable by nature. So we have the need to belong to a community, to contribute to other people's life. And that's something that unfortunately we are like with our society, with social media, with technology, we are losing more and more. And I believe that's one of the reasons that we have such a big crisis in anxiety and loneliness, especially in Gen Zs, and
Yeah.
more so because of the pandemic. So I believe that this is innate. We co-regulate with each other. I mean, if I'm anxious or stressed or angry and I sit with another human being that is calm, my nervous system will pick that up and will help me regulate. That's a fact. It's studied by Stephen Porges in the polyvagal theory, and we cannot then regulate alone. We can regulate alone in some cases, but to a long time, we do need people in our lives to really calm us down, to feel part of the community. This is innate. And then the need of attachment and the need of authenticity are also very ingrained in the self. In my own values, I value boldness. I like to live a life where I make bold decisions and sometimes maybe risky. Starting a startup is definitely one of them.
Yeah.
I value authenticity because this is something that has been also tough for me, really accepting my own needs. There is also this word needy already kind of like doesn't help. And there is a lot of that language doesn't help with all this emotional real, because we live in a culture where emotional maybe seem weak, and then we have this idea that emotional maybe is more feminine, and then if we cry we are not masculine, or these gender ideas about emotions, and then that that there is no pain no gain, sleep is for the weak, so we should like our body is a hindrance, like forget about your body, you just go, like hustle culture style. And then what happens is that people collapse, they burn out, they end up with a heart attack because they don't listen to their bodies. And our society is full of these mantras about not listening to our bodies, about disconnecting, about chasing some goals that we think that are going to make us happy. But at the end, if we are not connected with our needs and values, no goal that society puts us in front is gonna fulfill us.
I really like the word that stuck out to me during that, and I honed in on it and tried to remember it, was co-regulation. When you said, thought that was really, really interesting. And there's nowadays we believe that our emotional state and mental health is primarily an internal concept. So if you don't feel right, it's because of what's going on internally. But actually, and that's a psychological sort of point of view. So the psychoanalysis is analysis. People like Carl Jung and Freud, they were very internally dependent and centric. They thought mental health was more or less a result of you. But then there's a line of philosophical thinking. It might be existentialism that believed the complete opposite. It believed that your mental health was to do with what was going on around you. It was nothing to do with what was going on inside you, and it was to do with the people you were around, the places, etc., etc. And obviously, they're both true. They both have truth to them. But I think one of the problems that we get wrong with mental health nowadays is we are too egocentric in the sense of we're focusing on what's going on up here more than what's going on around us and who we're affiliating ourselves with. So I think that's really interesting. I didn't know that was scientifically proven that we can co-regulate, because that is definitely obviously going to be the case given how sociable we are as animals.
Do you know Gabor Mate? Have you listened to his podcast or books?
What was it again?
Gabor Mate.
Gabor Mate. Yeah. I can see a bit of him in you, actually. Yeah.
Yes.
He's good, isn't he?
He has a book, The Myth of Normal, about trauma in this society and how basically it's normal to be abnormal, to be in this mental health crisis due to the circumstances that we live in.
Yeah.
Given the society that we live in, with the different mantras and like ideas, and even the way we have moved from socializations to phones to, so it's really interesting. I recommend that you read it.
Yes. Well, I think no, I will check that out. I had someone on my podcast like last year, maybe 2 years ago now, and in the early days, and she was like a child development specialist or something. And she said that children need emotional regulation once every 30 seconds at least. They need help with their emotional regulation once every 30 seconds. And she wrote a book, that was it. She wrote a book called Why Prioritizing Motherhood in the First 3 Years of Life is Essential. And her sort of not doctrine, but the ideology she was promoting was that children really need help with their emotional regulation. And part of the reason why they're struggling so much, because they are struggling so much. And like Gen Z, I'm a Gen Z, I guess, but whatever the generation below me is, because I've worked in schools as well, a bit on and off, they're really going to struggle, like really going to struggle. We haven't seen anything yet. So your work is going to, this whole sector is going to be even more important in 5-10 years time, because they're fucked. Sorry guys, but they're gonna find it hard. But so yes, and okay, so that, and I thought that was really interesting. Once every 30 seconds, mind blown. How are they going to get that if they're at childcare with like 15, 20 other children, or nursery or whatever, just within the first 3 years? So that was her point. Which to be fair, a lot of historically kids go to school at 4, so that works out pretty well. But all this childcare and stuff, maybe that's not ideal, and I'm certain that that's part of the reason why children are struggling so much. A lot of the other things.
If the mother or the father are also stressed, and if
Exactly.
they are home, it also doesn't help, because the kid learns watching the adults calm down and being soothing and being like, no worry, there is nothing wrong. They copy the behavior. It's not like you're gonna tell them this is how you're gonna regulate your emotions. It's by you being able to regulate. So if you're an adult and you don't have those skills yourself, you need to get them, especially if you plan to have kids, and or even educate kids, or being with people, honestly, because that's one of the things that we see at Equanima. Is like, it's not just the individual. Like, if you're an individual, and we can, through our platforms, we have physical games, we have tools, web tools and app, whatever the platform that you feel more comfortable, learn to understand what are the emotions, what are the needs behind how to have an empathy language, and especially how this trigger works, it's changed your behavior toward other people. Because now, if I see a friend or somebody like completely going into a fight mode, like, oh my God, what I'm going to think? I'm talking to this person when they were 5 year olds. So how is my approach going to change? Because it's not what is wrong with them, is what has happened to them for them to go into this pattern. Because it's a whole changer, because then I'm not taking it personally. I'm becoming curious, and I'm also with empathy. And this is something that we need so much empathy, because we have lost the ability to understand each other. And I think this is fundamental for people, for the society to try it. So it's by helping one member of the family, it starts irradiates to the other members, and the other members start to get curious. I think she's changed. Like, I wonder what she's been doing. And then it grows to other families, it goes to their friends, and that's how you make a true inspiring and impactful movement.
Yeah. Empathy is another key word, and I definitely think, and I'm sure you do, we're becoming less empathetic as a society. And I think the reason is because we're actually becoming more brutal. We're sort of reverting a little bit back to our prehistoric nature, because everyone is so bit of a not dark, but stark claim, bold claim. Everyone is so dysregulated. So we don't have time as such to be more empathetic. So empathy is probably, like, everything's on a spectrum, and you've got some people who are going to be really, really empathetic, and they'll be empathetic regardless of what's going on from a wider perspective. And then you've got some people who are just not empathetic, and you're not going to get near them. But then you've got, like, the majority of people that are in the middle, and those people are a bit more, they sway depending on, I guess, how satiated they are in themselves in any given moment, or generally, but also what the social, what's the word? What the social sort of mood is, I guess. And I think that maybe the social mood, I mean, you're in sunny Barcelona, sunny Spain, so I'm sure the mood is always a little bit better generally than it is over in rainy England. But what, how do you think we can help more people be more empathetic towards others?
First, let's define empathy, because empathy has to do with the skill of recognizing emotions in others. So, first, you start with a problem that a person has a very limited vocabulary, like, hey, how are you? Great. Awful. It's like, okay, like 2, 3, 4 words, then empathy is not possible. So, one needs first to cultivate their own self awareness through really practicing a broader emotional vocabulary. Is it that I'm nostalgic, that I'm gloomy, that I'm feeling pessimistic? So becoming very accurate with one's emotions allow us that it's easier to perceive them in others. So once we perceive them in others, there is also this false idea of like empathy means like you need to give your needs up for helping other people, because it's a matter of balance.
Yeah.
I have my needs, you have your needs, but I can choose to be compassionate in a way, as long as it's also not going through like to my own detriment. So, for example, in this society, we value altruism a lot, and we don't like selfishness. Like, selfishness bad. So, but it's really not that way for a
More complicated than that, isn't it?
yeah, a healthy person needs to have their needs met, but also be aware of other people's needs, and then be balanced on that. Because if you compromise too much your needs, you are also going to end up in emotional pain, because obviously you're not getting your needs met. And this is what unfortunately happens a lot with the women, because the society thinks like, oh, they are the caregivers, like they need to do this and that, and they have to be the emotional support of the family, or there are all these conceptions about what means being a woman, but it's not really healthy at all. So either whatever gender you are, you need to take care of your needs as well as the needs of other in a balanced way. And then when looking at others people's emotion, not evaluate or going into judge, because we've been told in school all evaluative, is this true or false, is what's the correct answer, fix this, solve that. So we go into an emotional conversation and it's like, hey, I feel this, oh, I think you should do that and say this and do that. And that's like, okay, that's not, if the person asks you for advice, it's another thing. But once we're telling an story, especially if it comes with emotional pain, the ideal thing to do is to validate other people's feeling. I understand that that would have felt awful, that would have felt hurtful, that would be disappointing. And then when you repeat or rephrase the other person's feelings, then they feel hurt. And that's already so much better for that person.
That's
And that
50% of the problem, isn't it? Really?
yeah. And that also happens when you don't necessarily agree. So in conflicts,
Mm.
you could have a disagreement and still validate the other people feeling. So I don't agree with how you think this way, but I can understand that this can have made you feel disappointed. I'm not agreeing on anything. I'm not just validating the other person feeling, even if I disagree with their theory, because our feelings are always true. There is nobody that can tell you, no, you don't feel this way. If we feel it's true, but it doesn't mean I have to like sacrifice myself or anything. It's just like validate your feelings, and that's also helping a lot.
Validate your feelings, but also understand that all they are is feelings,
Yes.
in the sense of don't become too attached to your feelings.
Yeah, because they are information at the end. Every pleasant feeling informs you about the needs that have been met. And every unpleasant feeling informs you about the needs that have not been met. So if I'm feeling angry, maybe I needed respect, maybe I needed fairness. What is the need behind? So there are pieces of information. Are we aligning with our values? If I get angry because a friend of mine got insulted in the street, it's a good emotion to have because it means that I value my friend and I found that disrespectful and I wanted respect for my friend. So it's about seeing the connections between the needs and the emotions. And that's where we can take action. So instead of feeling, oh, I feel anxious and I am keep the feeling, okay, maybe I'm needing stability, I'm needing peace around me, needing order. How can we get us to that? Okay, what little things in my life can I start doing to get to that feeling of stability, to that need of order, for example?
There's a thing, like a rule or a piece of protocol in lifeguarding. Go back to the thing you said right at the beginning about not letting other people's energy basically zap yours. And there's a rule in lifeguarding where when you approach someone who's drowning, if you're a lifeguard, you approach them with your legs out. And the point is you say to them, I'm going to save you, but you need to stop kicking and screaming. Otherwise, I'm not going to save you, because if it's between you dying or me and you dying, it's going to be you dying. So that's kind of, obviously that's a very, very immediate and dramatic example. It's not like that in real life most of the time, but that's a good rule of thumb to go when you approach someone who's in, maybe not quite, because you need to have that sort of unconditional acceptance of them in the immediate short term, at least. But I always thought that, I remember when I heard that, I thought that was really interesting. Yeah, approach them with your legs out. Right. Let's talk about, I haven't asked any of the questions on here, I don't think, which is a very good sign, actually. So this is why I wanted to, yeah. How necessary is it for people to begin to recognize that, and how can Equanima help with people recognizing their emotional patterns? So this scenario takes place, then I have this thought, that thought, this feeling, da 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 da. Because it's all a chain reaction, isn't it? So how important is it to work out the beginning? What sets that first domino off, so to speak?
It's like a muscle. Emotional intelligence, indifferent from IQ test, is something that you can practice and you can learn over time. So, and this skill is going to help you in every aspect of your life. So, what you need to do first is to build that language of emotions, to be really able to say, okay, I can start distinguishing. And some people come and said, like, I don't even know where it starts. And that's why we have a cards game where you can start browsing body signals, different feelings, different needs. And in the app, actually, the AI helps you go through it. So you put a little prompt, and then the AI can suggest you needs and body signals. And then once you start to say like, hey, every time I get my palms sweating, I'm getting anxious. Or every time I start like clenching my fist, I'm getting angry. And then you can start to be more proactive. Because normally what happened is like we found ourselves in the impulsive. So like, oh my God, I already did this horrible thing. I should have waited or whatever. So the more that we practice this, the more that we cut ourselves before the impulsive reaction happens. When that happens, you have a choice because you know that, okay, this is something stressful happening. I know that I always going to submit. So I can make a really well thought say like, what are my needs in this moment? What is happening in this moment? And not react as the pattern reaction. And that's what's going to help us move away from these like child survival parts to our grounded self. In Equanima, our main character, because every of these parts have a character, the main character is the elephant. The elephant's showing resilience, showing strength, showing clarity. And it's about going back to your adult self.
Cute
About,
elephant.
yeah, a cute elephant. That's right.
Muy bonito.
Yes. So of course, if you are looking to live a more fulfilling life, if you are feeling stressed or purposeless, or that there is something not completely right, your body no, you know, your body is the full wisdom. So if there is something on your body telling you, like maybe there's something in my life, maybe there's something about the people that are in my environment, the work that I have, that is making your body react in some way, listen, listen carefully, and then take action on that. Start to be more aware.
So that the body keeps the score, sort of the idea. What's your I was speaking to someone the other day and we were talking about the idea of the subconscious and the subconscious mind, and no one really knows where the subconscious mind exists, or presumably it's definitely in the amygdala, because the subconscious mind is, as we sort of alluded to, is primarily emotional it's not logical, it's emotional. But there's also other ideas that the subconscious mind is like an energy field around you. This is a bit of a rogue question, but the subconscious mind is very, very important with emotional regulation, especially in the beginning. You were talking about just a minute ago, the choice. And I think emotional awareness in a large part is there's like a gap. It's like a sensory neuron and then a motor neuron. And if you have zero emotional regulation and awareness, they're like attached to each other. So it goes from one to the other. But the whole point of learning and increasing your knowledge of everything that you're teaching and helping people with is that the idea is probably maybe that gap gets bigger. So it has to be a really dramatic stimulus in order for you to be able to sort of like go to the motor neuron, or at least you're creating a bigger gap. So I can't remember what my first question was, but I know what the next one will be. How important is that, the choice? Use the phrase the choice. Go into that a bit more detail.
I'd say the choice is the ultimate point where you want to be, but it's not the first. At first, what's going to happen is that after you make that impulsive reaction, like maybe a half an hour later, it's like I went into a flight, food, totally a flight, or fight or whatever that reaction was. So you're going to realize maybe half an hour later. Then with more practice, maybe you're going to realize in the moment, but you're not going to be able to stop yourself. It's like, I know I'm in a fight, but look at what's happening. I know, but you are conscious that you are in a survival pattern. You're conscious of that, but you still react. And with time, you start to become more predictable. Like you, okay, this type of thing, I know that this. You also know to understand your triggers. Oh, whenever a person is with loud voice or ignoring me or said this specific thing or has this specific expression in their face, I snap. And then you are going to see that, and you're going to, hopefully with the Equanima, for example, you can learn some coping strategies. Okay, in this moment, let's go to a coping strategy right away. Not even try to reasoning, because when we are in such a stress state, and especially if it has some childhood wounds, to try to reason it out, maybe not the best idea, but to go outside on a walk, to go take a warm bath, to have a cup of tea, whatever works for you to get you more regulated, then that's the ultimate choice point that you have. Okay, I'm going to choose not to go into my typical stress reaction, but actually to use a coping strategy that is healthy for me.
Yeah. And every time you make the choice that, what would you say? I want to say the right choice, but I think that's a bit unfair. Every time you make the healthier choice, you grow the part of your brain and the part of you that can continually make that healthy choice, and you shrink the part of you that doesn't make the healthier choice. And that's
Yeah.
really key. It isn't just every single time I have the same battle. No, that's not what happens. The battle gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and that's great. But on the flip side, the battle can also get bigger and bigger and bigger if you don't make that choice. So the key is you have to get something pulling you towards a better response and also pushing you away from a bad response.
And it's important that you say that it's not only about going into the response, because we have to, this neural path that you have created, it gets stronger with practice. But it's important what you say about the subconscious, because once you have reacted in a way that is healthy, and perhaps it took you some courage to do,
Yes, definitely courage.
you need to talk to that child again. Say like, you see, this work, this is safe, this is another way, because this part of you, I don't know if you've seen Inside Out, but I love this metaphor about the belief system, because this protector part, the fight, the flight, whatever, has a belief system. The submit part is like, conflict are bad. We need to avoid conflict at all costs. This is the main belief. And this belief, even if you're conscious that, oh no, conflict is natural, it helps a relationship grow, it's in the unconscious, very, very deep rooted, And there is not only the reasoning part that's going to help, but the practice, and then looking back and saying, you see, like, this helps, this was better, this, and then you reinforce what is the healthy belief behind that. Conflict can sometimes lead to good outcomes, can make people grow and change. And that's actually the better self-awareness, because once you know the emotions, the body signals, and and you write down, because in your inner dialogue is where you're gonna find the beliefs. When you're in the stress, oh, I want to kill them, and you wrote this down, wrote this down,
Right.
and then
Yeah, exactly.
you will see what are the beliefs in that part, and then you can create healthier beliefs and practice those.
Yes, writing things down when you're in that state of heightened emotion is really important. Not only because we have this idea that we can think things sort of away and we can rationalize things, but actually human beings aren't very good at thinking. We have to say things, which is why like free speech is so important, not even from a political perspective, you have to be able to say things to your people, to your friends and the people you have relationships with. And there has to be an element of, I'm going to let this person say something and I'm not going to judge it straight away. If they say it a few times, then maybe I'll come back and go, you said this, why are you saying this? But if they just say it once, you just have to go, okay, then maybe, because the amount of times where I'm thinking something, going round and round and round in my head, and I say it out loud, and I'm like, actually, no, I didn't think that. And writing it down is the same thing. So writing it down and speaking are exceptionally more effective ways of processing things than thinking things through. It's not a very effective way of thinking things through. And I love the Inside Out analogy. I think that's perfect. Inside Out is a phenomenal film and a very accurate film with regards to how our brain works.
Yeah, and you mentioned so the part of the conflict and talking things out with the people when something bad happens, you know. So here are two parts, and this is where language becomes more important than ever, because one thing is what you think and you say aloud without judgment and everything, but then once this is all out, you need to find a way to rephrase it in a way that will really make empathy flow. And this is one of the examples where we have different games about emotion versus interpretations, because
It's one of my questions, actually. Yeah.
there is a big confusion about that. So if I tell you, Ollie, I feel mistreated, is that an emotion or an interpretation?
I think it's an interpretation. Is it an interpretation?
It is an interpretation.
Okay.
It is an interpretation whenever I have a sort of feeling that has to do with another people's behavior towards me.
Yep.
So if I say I feel abandoned, I feel humiliated, I feel betrayed, of course it has some feelings behind, but it's actually judging another people's behavior towards me.
Yes.
And that's what happens if I say to somebody is that it it destroys empathy, because the other person most likely is going to get defensive. Hey, Morgan, no, I didn't abandon you. I didn't mistreat you. I didn't humiliate you. And then there is no ability to understand each other because we have gone into a defensive mode. If instead of that, we go to the real feelings and the needs behind, hey, Oli, last night I felt very disappointed because I didn't go to the cinema with you and I felt I needed connection at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Your response is totally going to be different. That, hey, Oli, you abandoned me last night. What happened to you? Like, you know?
Yeah.
So it's very important that like we have one part. One part is we think everything through with ourselves, like write it down, however it comes, no judgment. But then after, it's like we need to find the right way to pick that up and put the better language to really make empathy be possible in the conversation. And
And
that's,
yeah,
yeah.
brilliant. And there's an even more sort of accusational stance that people take, which is they go, you never show up. When you direct it on the person, that's like that is a great way of getting someone to sort of
Oh,
rise
yeah,
up.
back.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly, and fight back. If you go, you never show up for me when I need you, some people will get defensive of that. Whereas if you say, I feel like, what would you say? What would you say in that instance? I
What's
feel
the feeling? What's the feeling first? Real feeling.
okay. I feel I feel
Is isolated a feeling or interpretation?
that's an interpretation. Oh God, I need to use the app. Right, so we're at the 57 mark. I don't want to go much more than an hour. So, do you want to talk about anything you want to talk about on the app and the what you can get from it, and give you time to promote what it is that you want to promote?
Sure. At Equanima, we are a movement about making emotional intelligence simpler and more accessible. We have, as I mentioned, different platforms. We have our web at equanima.io, and there you can subscribe for the app. It's currently in beta testing, but we have a form for people that want to try it out.
I'll try it
We
out.
have we have also physical games that you can find both in our website and at Amazon. We have the Emotional Intelligence Toolkit for people that want to go into self-awareness journey. It has all sorts of activities. You can play it alone or with trusted ones. Then also, we have also relationship playbooks meant for couples and families to play together. And we have a triggered response cards with all the characters to really understand what are the parts driving your stress reactions and how you can take a better coping mechanism in your life.